And I think, are we live? We're live now. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Andres, how's it going?
Like we were just chatting before in the green room, every software is slightly different between Zoom, Google Hangouts, etc. And of course, Social Live is a little nuanced as well. So I'm always like, wait, which software am I using to send everything? How are you doing today? Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining. It is Thursday, December 10th.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Yes, I every single time I do one of these calls, it's like, oh, another bespoke streaming platform that I need to work out how to navigate.
Yeah. Well, I think those days, these days are short-lived. In the future, obviously, with the vaccine coming about, I'm hearing good things. So, what a crazy year! How have you been holding up? Firstly, before we get into the show, where are you based and how have you been?
Yeah, so based in San Francisco, I have a lovely house, which I think like everybody else's experience of COVID, your house feels a little bit like a prison at this point of the year, but I have nothing to complain about. Twitch has been just growing exponentially this year. So we had a massive surge of new streamers, new audience with social distancing and people being at home. So it's been a very busy year on the Twitch front. But healthy, happy, glad to be here.
Have you taken any trips or seen any airports in the past 6, 7, 9, 8 months?
So we did a driving trip up to Missoula. So I know you interviewed Fritz Landman, who's the CEO. So my husband Marcus and I drove from San Francisco to Missoula in summer and spent 4 weeks in a bubble with Fritz and his wife, and then another friend of ours who lives up there who also works at ClassPass. So it was really good fun. It was lovely to get away.
Oh, that's amazing. I wish I would have known. Maybe I would have tagged along for one of the weekends. So that's a great trip. How is Montana? I mean, being in Missoula, I guess Fritz and having space and a lot of folks who've been in large cities, they've gone inland, and it seems to be like the really smart decision for those who have done it and fun.
Oh, absolutely. From a lifestyle perspective, it's just a no-brainer. I mean, your quality of life is so much better than it is in a big city. And I think, all credit to the ClassPass team that they've built their HQ there. Missoula reminded me a lot of New Zealand. I'm from New Zealand originally. It's the wide open spaces and the mountains and the rivers and just generally fairly laid back lifestyle. So yeah, it was a breath of fresh air in a year that otherwise has been quite stressful.
This is stressful. Well, I'm going to have to make a trip to Montana soon myself. Great. So we're gonna get in the show, but before we do, I'd love to present your background. Sara Clemens is COO of Twitch and former COO of Pandora. She has 20 years of leadership experience in the broadcast, technology, and entertainment industries. Prior to Twitch, Sara was COO at Pandora, where she worked to transform the internet radio pioneer into a personalized music service connecting artists directly with fans at scale. I'm a big Pandora user still today. And as well as I'm also a gamer, so I love Twitch. Prior to Pandora, Sara was an executive team at LinkedIn responsible for Corp Dev and new ventures, during which she led the company's successful entry into the China market. Sara spent 5 years in a range of leadership positions at Microsoft, including leading international expansion, business operations, and new ventures for Xbox division. During this time, she was a founding member of the team that created HoloLens, Microsoft's market-leading AR headset. I remember those days, and that's where we first met at Microsoft.
It is.
How time has passed. Sara has extensive experience building consumer internet businesses across a broad range of international markets, including EMEA, LATAM, and Greater Asia Pacific. She holds an MA with honors from University of Canterbury in New Zealand. So, wow, what an impressive background, and thank you for making the time today. So I have a few burning questions, and anyone who is watching and tuning in live, feel free to ask any questions. I'll monitor the LinkedIn. But in the meantime, tell me, how did you end up Twitch as CEO? What was your path, and are you a gamer at heart?
So Twitch, I joined Twitch in January 2018. I had taken some time off after Pandora, so I decided to step out and have one of the world's most overdue gap years. So I had written my master's thesis and gone straight to work 3 days later, and we've moved countries 4 times since then, and all of them were with my role, and so I haven't had gaps between those country moves. And so 2017 was a year of just reflection on what it was I wanted to do next. And the thing that I really recognized gets me out of bed every day is I love operating at the intersection of digital media and tech. That's all of my roles have had a very strong orientation in terms of how content is evolving, how technology is impacting the way people come together around content and create content. And as I looked around at the landscape at the time, you recall 2017, it was a pretty hot year in terms of consumer internet startups in San Francisco, really getting to scale and looking for scaled leadership. Right. And there was sort of, transportation efforts, so the Ubers and the Lyfts, but then also a whole bunch of autonomous vehicle companies. There was a lot of consumer fintech companies that were doing really well, a lot of social service companies. And I wasn't sure I'd find anything in media that would be really interesting. It didn't feel like there was much less to innovate on at that time. And then the Twitch team actually reached out to me. So Emmett Shear, the CEO, was looking for a chief operating officer. I got together with him. I was familiar with Twitch from my time at Xbox. So, 2010 through 12, when I was at Xbox, we had looked at Justin TV at the time as they'd started their live streaming service, but I wasn't familiar with what they'd done since they'd been acquired by Amazon. And, the company's run as a standalone subsidiary, so we're independent. It's sort of the best of both worlds. We get to be nimble and fast and, do the things we want to do and operate the business globally. But we have this incredible partnership with Amazon where we have, access to amazing leadership and talent and as necessary capital to continue growing the business.
I was going to say, and a great coffer of capital.
Yes, and a great coffer of capital to grow the business over time where we were able to make, cases for investment. And so I spent a lot of time with Emmett and just loved that Twitch was doing something that to me felt like one of the remaining areas of consumer media that hadn't been disrupted, which was the live television space. Twitch is effectively live television for Gen Z and millennials.
That's right.
The behaviors, the daily consumption patterns, the lack of television that they actually consume. And so it felt like this medium of live television, which really hadn't been that disrupted by the internet, like video on demand had been by Netflix and what have you, but
right.
Yeah, the actual engagement if I'm watching this live is still pretty 1950s. And so it just felt like this was something where there was a real opportunity to change the way that people interacted with media, came together around communities of interest. And to your question about gaming, I've long believed that where gamers go, others follow. Gen Pop does what gamers do 10 years later generally. And, it's because gamers like technology, they're massive adopters of technology, and, you see the things that they have done often just flow through to more generalized services. And so in my mind, while Twitch's heritage is in gaming and a material amount of our content is in gaming, over 79% of the population in the United States over the age of 13 identify as gamers. This is not a niche activity anymore. And so in my mind, while we have heritage and momentum in gaming, the potential for Twitch was so much greater, and that really excited me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I love that. And I can totally see it. Just out of curiosity, what is the top kind of trending title right now on Twitch that folks are watching?
Yeah, so that varies day to day depending on what's happening. There's some big ones that have happened this year. So Valorant, kicked off the year. That was pretty broadly adopted. Among Us, which is just one of those like sleeper independent games that just suddenly took off and now everybody's playing it. Fall Guys was the top game for the better part of a month. People were just looking for things that were slightly lower pressure and more social to play. And I think both Fall Guys and Among Us really lean into that. Escape from Tarkov was massive at the beginning of the year. The Call of Duty release this year has been big. And
I've been getting a lot of my skills, like secretly on the weekends, I've been playing Call of Duty, locked in my office, away from my fiance. And then she would be like, "Are you watching another person play video games on the desktop while you're playing. I'm like, yeah, I'm getting some tips and skills from the 16-year-old who's streaming right now.
Yeah. You just have to accept that whoever's teaching you is definitely half your age. Yeah, it's just one of the things I've accepted at this point. But no, so it's been amazing. I mean, we've had a really strong portfolio of games come through. And then my last call out would be the Epic team are continuing to nail it with Fortnite. Like, they just dropped their latest season. It's doing really well. And so, you know, I never underestimate the games developers we work with. They constantly surprise me.
I love that. I love that. Tell me, as COO for Twitch, how do you think about corporate development, and how do you manage the corp dev function?
Yeah. So I should say at the outset, for anyone who's watching this who's from an investment bank, I am not your corp dev person. So I had a very different sort of path into corporate development. So I did the early part of my career in New Zealand, and New Zealand is a market of, you know, geography of 4 million people, but it's the same size as the United Kingdom geographically. And so you've got 4 million people running all the national infrastructure, telecommunications, building all the services. And it's a geography where, as you start in your career there's a little bit of, oh, you're smart, you'll work it out, you give this a go.
Right.
And so I ended up, by virtue of being involved in a bunch of sort of big strategic projects, I started out as a policy advisor for the government in the broadcasting advisory space. And through sort of doing strategy work and policy work, and then doing a number of big partnerships with industry players while I was in government, I ended up in roles where I was negotiating a whole range of different commercial deals. And, you know, then somebody says, oh, we'd like to look at acquiring a company, go and do that. You know, so it wasn't really any training. It was more like, okay, what do we do? And so I start with corporate development from, I think, what you often see strategists and policy advisors start from, which is, what are we trying to achieve?
Right.
You know, like it's always the question I ask when I'm in a company and somebody says, you know, we want to buy something. And I'm like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Because corporate development is not something you do, you know, for the sake of doing it. You do it to solve a problem or address an opportunity or accelerate your path down the strategy that you are currently deploying. And so, you know, that's very much how I come at it inside the business. And there's really 4 macro reasons why I would do corp dev. So there's a team that you want to acquire, or you want to accelerate a particular kind of talent into the company. There's technology you want to acquire that is going to accelerate your roadmap. There's IP that you want to get access to, or you have a business strategy and it will accelerate your execution against that business strategy. And so for us, you know, and one of the interesting things at Twitch is we don't do a lot of corporate development. And I think it's a consequence of the fact that in many respects, we are leading in the live streaming market. Right. And there hasn't been a lot of companies where you're like, oh, they're doing something that Twitch in itself hasn't already been innovating on. Having said that, we have done some great acquisitions. So we did IDGB last year, which is the company out of Sweden that we brought on board. They've been working on and, you know, helping all of our metadata across the site be more effective. And we acquired the Bebo team, which was to help accelerate some of the efforts we had in esports, both around our first-party esports program Rivals, and then thinking about tools for other tournament operators. And so they're much more sort of small, identified across a particular roadmap opportunity. And, you know, we have a great team. They do an amazing job building relationships across the ecosystem. You know, we have monthly meetings with the team, with my executive team and Emmett Shear, and we go through like what are all the things we're seeing and what do we want to look at. And, you know, the teams, the corporate development team will drive those discussions. We're also really lucky when we do something, we can tap into the Amazon Corp Dev team. So we sort of have the best of both worlds again, a bit like I was saying in respect to.
Even though you guys are independent, you can still collaborate with Amazon's parent Corp Dev team. Cool. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, our relationship with Amazon, you know, we're an independent subsidiary. We run everything ourselves, but we tap into Amazon for anything that we would like access to. It is literally does feel like the best of both worlds.
Wow.
And so for transactions, we will often leverage their acquisition integration team, for example, because if we don't need an acquisition integration team permanently, but having access to a fully formed one that does many transactions is incredibly helpful to us. So, we tend to operate in a partnership with them when we get to the transaction stage of deals.
Well, thank you for those insights. I'm familiar with the Amazon Corp Dev team. I didn't know about the collaboration aspects, but very insightful. Thank you. As a member of the board of several companies such as Duolingo, Hootsuite, etc., how does Corp Dev differ at a board level versus an operating executive role?
So you could actually just rephrase that question was, how does anything differ as a board member versus an operating executive? Yeah. Corp Dev just happens to be one of the things. You wear a different hat. You're responsible for making sure that the governance aspects of the company are working effectively, that they're deploying capital appropriately, that you're supporting the team and helping their executive team and the CEO be successful in their mission. But the reality is you're not, rolling up the sleeves and diving in and actually executing. And so you can provide guidance and advice and oversight, but that's very different to I'm actually on the hook for making sure that this deal not only gets transacted effectively and appropriately, but that, I've always maintained 90% of the value of any deal is the integration.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. It does not matter how good the negotiation you do is. If you don't have a really strong plan for how you're going to integrate that company into your business and run it, you are going to leak value from day one. Yeah. And so for me, that's where really you rely on the management teams of those companies to do that.
Wow, thank you for that. Yeah, I always say integration is one of the most important aspects. And I would genuinely say like over 50%, but 90%, you're probably right. It is probably 90%. And during our Microsoft days, there were some big acquisitions that were in the billions of dollars that withered away and slowly died after a few years, and largely I think probably because of integration, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think there are two things that companies go sideways in corporate development. One is they don't have a clear strategy as to why they're buying something. So people in competitive bid situations where a bunch of investment bankers turn up and say, so-and-so is on the market and all these other companies that you feel like you compete with and the company feels pressured into bidding. And you're like, well, to the question you asked at the beginning, what's the strategy we would be deploying this asset against? Like, what is it we're trying to achieve with this? And I think, so you either see it go wrong because there wasn't a clear strategy about why you were acquiring the company.
All right.
Then the flip side is once you've acquired it, then how do you go about integrating it? And that has, I describe acquisitions as marriages. You have to actually think about like, what are the compromises we're going to make? How are we going to live together? If you don't like each other the day before you did the acquisition, you're certainly not going to like each other 3 months in. And so there is.
I love that analogy.
There are a lot of marriage analogies that hold very true in acquisitions.
That's right. As COO, former COO of Pandora, what corp dev deal were you most proud of?
So at Pandora, I would say the audio deal. So, we had a very clear strategy. We wanted to move beyond just personalized radio to being a full service company. And we were very focused around how did we connect artists and fans at scale. And one of the things that we realized we would need to do in order to run a service, which, it's primarily mobile based, that's where the vast majority of consumption occurred, was the design of the service was really critical in ensuring that we continued to give people who were really loyal Pandora users an experience that didn't feel jarring. Like, suddenly there's all this other stuff that you've layered in over the top. And much as I love Spotify, I would say their app feels a little bit like something that's had a lot of stuff attached to it over time. And so it's quite hard to navigate. And the audio team was both about buying the back-end infrastructure for on-demand music streaming, but a lot of it was the team and the design ethos. The audio music app was the most delightful music app to use from an on-demand perspective. And so for us, it was very much about how did we ensure that we carried that design philosophy into Pandora and ensured that the rebuild of our service to integrate both radio and on-demand music was going to show up in a way which felt really intuitive and delightful to our listeners. And to this day, I continue to use Pandora when I'm in the United States, which sadly is the only country it works in anymore. And they really did a brilliant job. It is a very intuitive and
I use both Pandora and Spotify.
Yeah, I do.
How long did that deal kind of take end to end? What was that?
There was a long deal.
Long deal.
We had a strategy to move into on demand, and then there was a question of what are the necessary assets in order to be in a position to do that, and what was the things we were going to have to build. And we had looked at, it was a classic situation where we have a very clear strategy, we know what we want to achieve. Are there things we could buy that would accelerate this? And we were very clear about what we wanted to acquire and why. And the length was as much, I think, it's been well reported, Audio went into bankruptcy as part of that deal construct.
I remember that.
We bought the technology assets out. That's quite a hard deal construct to execute on as a publicly listed company because of the disclosure requirements. And it created some risk in terms of close. But we felt very strongly that that was the only clean transaction structure that made sense for Pandora. And so we decided to go down that path. But there was a certain amount of length to the negotiation to achieve that.
Got it. Thank you for sharing insight into that. But yeah, I'm familiar. That was a big transaction. Final question. We're at the tail end of the show. As a member of Global Women, what token career advice can you give to our aspirational female leaders who want to join the C-suite of a larger company as you have?
So it's funny you get asked these questions, and I always sort of pause because it feels it underrepresents the challenge of being a female executive in technology to say there's one thing you can do. There are 1,000 things. There are 1,000 things you will need to do in order to be successful. And the sort of, so that's my caveat on this answer. But the thing I would say is there's two things. Believe you can do it and then ask for it. I never really saw myself as a senior executive. I was very much in that sort of mindset of I'm a great advisor. I'm someone who's sort of behind the scenes and I can get this work done. And it wasn't until, a manager of mine said, you should be on an executive team. You should be a CEO one day. You have that in you. Why aren't you going after it? And it wasn't until that I was like, oh, that's a mind shift. And then he's like, you have to ask for it. And you have to be very clear. Say, what do you want to do in your career? I want to be on the C-suite of a consumer internet company. And it's funny, it took me a long time to do it. It feels very unnatural. I don't know if this is just me or if this is women generally, to be like, no, I can do that and I want to do it and you should give me a chance. I think women err more towards the, let me prove to you I can do it. It's a much longer, it's a much longer road because it's not based on potential, which is I have the talent. It's based on evidence. It's let me show you that I can do this.
Yes.
And, the thing that I did, it's carried forward for me now. And then I often get approached about operating roles and I'll go back and say, I'm very happy at Twitch, thanks, but I'd love to look at any board roles. And I would never have done that without that kind of advice of learn how to ask for the things that you want.
I love that. And that's true for anyone in any background. That's stellar advice and rings totally true. I see that. And I've always thought of you as an executive anyway. Since the first time we started working together, years way back when. So I knew it was only a matter of time. Final few questions, more fun things. How have you been staying fit? Because I know you like to be energetic and hike, etc. Everyone has a different routine. I'm always asking the question.
Yeah, we developed a COVID routine actually. So historically, I travel enormously for work. I've probably traveled 20 weeks a year for the last 20 years of my career. And often would go out running or whatever in cities that I was in. And with COVID, I found that I was just working out. We have a little home gym and I was working out there, but then I'd be doing this 10 hours a day. And you start going a little bit insane because you're just in the house the whole time. And so my husband this
is my prison as well.
I know. I'm like, I see this room a lot. My husband about 6 weeks in was like, I think we need to get you out of the house. And so we get up, and this is this is his not favorite part of it. The alarm goes at 5:45. We're on the road by 6, and we do a walk here in San Francisco. It's 6 miles over Twin Peaks and back to our place. And it's got a pretty good sort of altitude on it. And we did it Mondays and Wednesday mornings. It's real. There's no one around. We wear masks, but there's still no one around. And so you feel like you have this moment at the beginning of the day where you get the city to yourself, you get some fresh air, It has absolutely maintained my sanity.
Amazing. Yeah, I've been doing some hikes. I haven't been as energetic as I used to be, but I sometimes cycle. I actually cycled from Paris to Monaco last year, 1,000 kilometers in 6 days, and I thought I would be aggressive this year, but for some reason, COVID, I still haven't hit that point where I'm like, oh man, I need to be kind of back on the full exercise train. But yeah, it is an interesting time. I think outdoors is where people have really picked up, and apps like All Trails, for example, are just killing it. And final question: are you a chef? Do you cook at home? Do you like to use DoorDash? Like, what's your eating routine during these crazy anomaly times?
Yes, I have to say this was one of the shocking moments when you realize how privileged you are that I get 3 meals a day when I'm at Twitch, and we have this insanely good kitchen. And suddenly, my husband retired in January this year, and so he basically 2 months later, as we went into lockdown, ended up his full-time job now is looking after me. We did a lot of cooking in the first sort of 6 months, and then we got really bored of it. And so at the moment, we're on Thistle, which I'm loving. So Thistle delivers us, meals for Monday through Thursday, and actually, it's been really nice having a change.
So Thistle is your primary
at the moment
food program? Oh, interesting. I haven't used Thistle. I'll have to check it out.
They're really good. I've been really impressed, I have to say. I am a cook. I love cooking. That's sort of, if you said what things are you competent at, I would say cooking I'm pretty competent at.
Yes.
And I have a pretty high bar. We don't eat a lot of delivery food because I always find it slightly disappointing. But I have to say they've done a really nice job.
Amazing. Love to hear that. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure you have a crazy packed day. Thank you so much for making the time here today. Again, Sara Clemens, COO of Twitch, formerly also the COO of Pandora. You have an amazing background. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and I loved catching up. Glad to hear you're doing well, and hope to see you soon.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Andreas. Stay safe and have a great holiday.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers.